Hello, I'm Emily here at CADDi with my colleague Nate. And today we're going to talk about kind of a mindset that a lot of manufacturing shops may need to adapt themselves to in the coming years. The idea of doing a fast and effective pivot. So you've got strategy A, it may have been working for you for years, and suddenly there is a burning need to adopt a strategy B. So I was very excited to chat with Nate on his perspective on pivoting in general, what makes a successful pivot, and how that could be applied to the manufacturing industry. So what would you say are some of the key factors in a successful pivot?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on this little conversation, Emily. Yeah, I mean, pivoting is very important in general. You have to kind of be flexible. And I study a lot of martial arts, and Bruce Lee talked about being like water, being flexible, right? Fitting into the vessel, and not being too rigid. And it can be challenging when you are very knowledgeable about something, because if you're knowledgeable, you've been doing it for a long time, you have a lot of experience, and you're going down a path, right? But then all of a sudden, as you go down that path, what starts to happen? You start to see some edges on that path. And then all of a sudden you see a change and you don't know, should I go left? Should I go right? Should I go forward? Pivoting to me means being able to kind of foresee that path coming and making not the best decision, but be able to make a decision. And I think a lot of times when you're experienced, you kind of want to keep on trudging forward, as opposed to going left or going right.
No, I think that's very insightful. I love the Bruce Lee reference, a very inspirational man. I like this idea as well of it's not about making the absolute perfect decision. I think very often you can get that sort of analysis paralysis where it's like, clearly we need to do something else. Let's wait a year, 2 years, trying to figure out what that ideal solution is. But you think, and I agree with you, that it's better to just keep moving, to adapt, to evolve, and to review on the fly. So I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little bit. Like, how do you kind of get over, though, that fear of, well, what if I'm making an even worse choice?
Yeah, yeah. So it's funny. I was talking to one of my friends actually a few nights ago, and they're talking about the economic trends and what parts of our current system, what changes are going to happen, and how should they make trades or business moves based upon what's happening. And they're saying, hey, there's all these things. There's possible tariffs. There's a change in the manufacturing ecosphere. Obviously, we've had a political change. We will have a political change, and they had like a list of all of the different things that are happening. And I told them, I'm like, I think you're a little bit too much in the weeds, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because all these permutations can go multiple directions, and you have to kind of stick to one kind of focus and theme and elaborate from there, and then make your strategy mid, short, and long term. So, you can't take all the information in. You have to kind of create a list. What are the most important things for your role, for your function, for your business, and then make a decision. You got to move forward, because inaction is very poisonous for making something happen effectively.
Absolutely. I like this idea of kind of a hierarchy of priorities, because you're right. You can drive yourself insane thinking about all the things that could happen in the next 4 years, in the next 10 years. It's a list that could go on forever. So I think, yeah, being able to identify, okay, well, this is the actual most crucial thing. This would be the most impactful on us. Let's build a strategy around that. And sure, we can come up for a million reasons that it may not work, but at least we're moving forward with something in the short term.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious as well, like when you talk about these sort of upcoming manufacturing things, what we found is that it's kind of tough to switch gears in manufacturing, to use an automotive analogy. If you've got a machine that's set up to produce part A, it can sometimes be difficult to totally overhaul and reconfigure that to produce part B. And what we found is that kind of the further ahead you can plan for these sort of flexibilities, for this adoption of different production, how flexible you can make those machines and how flexible you can make those the data driving those decisions, just kind of the more lead time you have on these sort of shifting market demands. So what I'm really curious about is, like, what do you think can unlock that perspective, of kind of seeing what else you can do in a given situation, or seeing how you can apply the resources you have to something different than what you're currently doing, if you have any experience with things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So we're in football season right now, and one of my mentors used to always talk about the field. So obviously, if you're a
Mm,
football person, you know that the field is pretty long, but you all have things that are happening down the field, towards the goal line. You have things that are happening in the midfield, and things are happening right there at the line of scrimmage, right?
mm,
And they used to always say, "Hey, constantly be looking down the field, Emily. Be looking down the field." And from a quarterback's perspective, it couldn't be any better for a leader, especially in manufacturing. You have to figure out ways, systems, and processes to make your flow very, very, very nimble. So whether you're getting machines that can have different kind of job types, whether you have people who are more generalists who are very quick at learning different things, whether or not you yourself kind of change your mindset, look down the field. Because if you're stuck, let's say, being doing metal fabrication, you're doing wire harnesses, you're doing one specialized kind of good. Well, what happens if your big client is about 40% of your business says no? Can you shift over to a metal bending? Do you have the right
mm.
kind of machines? Can you shift over to a total different product line, either to increase revenue or to expand it? So you have to be looking down the field at all the times. And I think that's one of the key points, using that football analogy, to be a true pivot artist, so to speak.
No, I really like this analogy. Now, I'm a Canadian, of course. Play
Hmm.
a little more hockey up here than the old pigskin, but my understanding too is that it's a lot of like, you have a plan, you've got your audible or whatever that the quarterback is calling,
Mm.
but that there's always an element of rapid adjustment, that if you see kind of a critical warning sign, you've prepared for how to respond to that sort of warning sign, and you pivot from, say, a running play to doing a long lob to somebody who's open. And please forgive me if this is
No,
not
no,
really
you're
matching
doing it
the
right.
strategy
Yeah,
of
yeah.
football. And I think that analogy is quite interesting, because you kind of got to think about, all right, well, what are my open receivers in this industry? You gave a great, very practical example. Like, what are the other things that these machines could be used for if the demand suddenly disappears? And I think what we're going to be seeing in the next 4 years is sudden spikes of demand of products that we used to just
Yeah.
import. It used to be the easiest thing in the world to say, okay, we're going to source this from Vietnam, we'll source this other part from China, we'll source another part from Mexico, and then all of these things will come together. That may not be the number one easiest option anymore. That might incur a lot more costs, a lot more delays, a lot more uncertainty. And I think now we're going to see a rush towards producing all three of those parts somewhere in the continental US, maybe even in your own facilities. So I think, yeah, this really underlines the importance of perceiving those capabilities, of seeing the other aspects of your process that you can internalize, that you can take on. I'm curious as well, when you think about this just kind of idea of a successful pivot, is there anything else you can say about kind of the mindset that people have? Like you mentioned before, it's tough when you're already an expert on something to kind of put aside that expertise and instead take on something that might be new and challenging and novel.
Yeah, yeah. So, working in startups, I've worked in startups for a while now. And there's kind of a startup mindset,
Mm,
of being curious, of looking to break things, right? And not believing in your own hubris.
mm,
So what happens a lot of times, again, when you're experienced, you've been doing the job for 25, 30 years, well, that sounds good, but we have our own way. I've done it this way and it's worked perfectly. Sometimes success can be the biggest challenge for somebody because they don't look to change. So in the mindset, you have to have a situation where, and it's not necessarily a generational thing. It's not necessarily an age thing. People who are willing to ask themselves the question, is this working? And I want to break it and do something different before. So it starts from the top, from the leader on down. Can they do that themselves, being the president, the CEO, the VP, whatever, the director? And then to the mid and the line level team members, are there different people there that you can spread that mentality to? And if you have one of those people throughout those different functions, you're going to be very, very well prepared for success.
I really like this. I love the comparison with the startup mentality. As someone else who's been working in startups for quite a while now, for the majority of my career, it really is a very exciting, very thriving feeling
Yeah,
to go into a role and feel like, well, maybe we can just do anything. Like, we are not set in stone to how things ought to be or how they have to be. But we are poised and we are agile enough to take advantage of any opportunity that comes into our path. I think it's tough because when I do research into, our prospects and our current customers, these are companies that have been around for like 100 years.
yeah,
They started off making farm equipment in the 1920s. And at a certain point, they kind of hit a steady path of production and of meeting demand. And you can understand why it's difficult for them to
sure.
think we're a startup, we're agile, we're ready for anything. But I take some solace in the fact that all of these companies back in the 1920s were like the original startups.
Right.
They were guys working out of their garage. They were coming up with kind of makeshift ways to produce en masse new products that maybe nobody had ever seen before. That is, I think, the heart of American manufacturing, is that ingenuity, that feeling of rising to demands that hadn't even existed before. So I want to believe that all of these companies can once again embrace that spirit and pivot to, whatever new market demands emerge in this next era.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I was reading something actually this morning in TechCrunch about a new startup that's creating a novel way to do 3D printing for a specific kind of metal alloy that's used in aerospace.
Mm,
And they hadn't this had been done, it's like a way to pre-dry this 3D metal that usually would take several days or weeks. They can do it in the 3D process where it's already dry. And
wow.
they're creating a total new market for this, and they're getting a lot of funding for it. So I think it's a problem that's been out for a long time, but they said, hey, why can't we 3D print this metal, and why can't we actually have it harden and dry faster? And there you go. They're solving a problem, and they're getting a lot of contracts from the government and from other organizations. So yes, you have to be able to think a little bit differently. You have to be able to kind of bob and weave, and try to put on that hat of. I mean, because you're going to be forced to do it. I mean, what's going to happen is some of these groups are going to be overwhelmed with orders, or they're going to be forced to kind of shift. If they do not have that startup mentality, it's going to be hard to kind of come back with the demand and hit the customers in a way that's actually going to be worthwhile.
Hmm. No, I think when it comes down to it, when it's tough times, uncertain times, turbulent times, if your plan is, well, we'll just do what we've always done, you're kind of just rolling the dice at best. You're just sort of hoping that even though the field is totally different, the landscape is different, you've got blockers coming in your face from all directions. You're still just hoping, well, maybe our status quo is good enough. But I think you can do better. Yeah, I think you can rise to this occasion. You can come up with all sorts of ways to meet these novel demands that involve that sort of out of the box thinking. It's I feel like there's a lot of bleak attitudes towards this next era of
Hmm.
American manufacturing. I think certainly there is going to be a lot of hurt, but I want to maintain this sort of enthusiastic optimism that within these challenges there will be opportunities as well. I think you've given a really, really great example of very new technology that has emerged only recently, and a company that had the ingenuity and the willingness to pivot to embrace that and to thrive with that opportunity. It's been really great talking to you about this subject. I hope our audience found it a little invigorating, a little uh, change of pace from maybe the doom and gloom that we typically have around the manufacturing economy. Thank you so much for joining me, Nate. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts on the subject before we wrap up.
No, well, thank you very much for having me, Emily. I think we have some opportunity, and let's see how we can grow together.
That's awesome. All right. Good talking. See you guys next time.
Bye bye.